Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to try and, solve a bit of a historical paradox. Usually when we talk about the British Empire or, colonization, the Royal Navy, we're dealing with this concept of grandeur.
Right.
Massive ships to the line, hundreds of guns, thousands of men, huge egos, huge budgets.
Right. You think of the Victory, the Endeavor, the Sirius. These are the names that just take up all the oxygen in the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, we are looking at a vessel that is, quite frankly, disproportionate. And I mean that in the wildest way possible.
I know what you mean.
We're talking about a ship that is arguably the single most important vessel in the early colonization of Australia. A ship that mapped the coastline, found the capital cities, moved the populations. And yet, if you saw it in the harbor today, you would probably mistake it for a large fishing boat.
Or a coastal ferry. Yeah. It really is a case of the little engine that could, if, the little engine was armed with cannons and sent into pirate-infested waters.
Right.
We're talking, of course, about the HMS Lady Nelson.
The Lady Nelson. Now, before we get into the heavy stuff, the exploration, the founding of Melbourne and Hobart, the massacre, we have to address the reputation this thing had before it even left London.
Oh, yes.
Because Lady Nelson sounds very dignified, very proper. But the sailors on the Thames, they had a different name for her.
They did. They called her HMS Tinderbox.
Tinderbox. Okay, that is not a nickname that inspires confidence.
Oh.
That implies she's either going to catch fire or she is so fragile that she's going to snap into kindling the moment a decent wave hits her.
It was a bit of both, honestly. The critics, and there were a lot of them, they looked at her design and basically said, this is a coffin.
Right.
You have to understand, the Lady Nelson wasn't just small. She was experimental. She was a prototype. And in the 18th century, experimental usually meant deadly.
So our mission today is to unpack the life of this experimental workhorse. We're going to look at the secret weapon she had under her hull that made her so special. We're going to sail with her through the Bass Strait when no one knew if there was even a way through. And we're going to follow her to her end, which is, it's not a happy ending.
It's a violent, tragic ending, but it's a necessary part of the story. Her career spans exactly 25 years, from 1800 to 1825. And in that quarter century, she basically stitched the Australian colonies together.
So let's start where all ships start, the shipyard. We're in Deptford, London. It's 1798. What are we looking at here? Because Tinderbox implies small. But how small?
Extremely small. She was built at Deadman's Dock, which, again, great name for a superstitious sailor by a builder named John Deadman.
Yeah, not reassuring.
Not at all. And, to visualize her, you have to throw away your mental image of a tall ship. The Lady Nelson was 60 tons burden.
60 tons. For context, the Endeavour Cook's ship was what, nearly 400 tons?
About 370, yes. So the Lady Nelson is, it's a fraction of the size. It's not even in the same league.
That's incredible.
Her length on deck was 52 feet, 6 inches. That is roughly 16 meters. 16 meters. I've seen semi-trailers on the highway that feel longer than that. There are luxury yachts in Sydney Harbor right now that would absolutely dwarf this thing.
Oh, easily. And she had a beam her width of about 17 feet. So imagine a vessel the size of a modern harbor tug or a large private cruiser being tasked with sailing from England to Australia, fully loaded, and then mapping thousands of miles of unknown, treacherous coastline.
And originally, she wasn't even meant for that, was she? She wasn't built for the open ocean.
No, and that's a crucial point. She was originally intended for the transport office on the River Thames. She was designed to be a cutter, a coastal vessel for moving goods or messages short distances.
A riverboat, basically.
A riverboat, essentially. But she was built with this very specific, very radical technology that caught the eye of the powers that be.
Okay, this is the secret weapon, the sliding keels.
Correct, the sliding keels. Now, I sail a bit, so I know what a keel does. It's the big fin on the bottom that stops the boat from sliding sideways. But usually a keel is a solid structural part of the ship. You don't mess with the keel.
Exactly. In traditional shipbuilding, the keel is the spine. It's massive, it's heavy, and it's solid. But this ship was designed by Captain John Shank of the Royal Navy.
Shank.
And Shank was, he was a visionary, but he was also a bit of a mad scientist in naval architecture terms. He recognized a fundamental paradox in survey work.
Which is?
To be safe in the open ocean, you need a deep draft. You need that big keel biting into the water to keep you stable and stop leeway, that sideways drift. If you don't have a deep keel in a storm, you just skate across the surface like a bar of soap, and eventually you capsize or you hit rocks.
Right, makes sense. But if you have a deep keel, you can't go into shallow water.
Exactly. If you want to explore a river mouth or cross a sandbar or map a bay, a deep keel is a liability. You'll run aground. So Schenck says, why choose? He designed the Lady Nelson with 3 separate sliding keels, basically centerboards, located in watertight walls down the center line of the ship.
I want to pause on that. Watertight wells. Because that sounds terrifying to me. He basically cut 3 massive holes through the bottom of the boat.
He did. He created 3 vertical shafts, 1 forward, 1 amidships, 1 aft. And inside these shafts were these large timber planks, the keels, that could be winched up or down.
So you're introducing 3 potential massive leak points right in the middle of the hull. On purpose.
That was exactly the criticism. The Admiralty and the veteran sailors looked at this and said, you are compromising the structural integrity of the ship. They thought the torque of the ocean would twist the hull, crack the wells, and the ship would sink from the inside.
But the theory was sound.
The theory was brilliant. With the keels down, she drew about 12 feet of water. That's enough to stabilize her in the Atlantic swells. But if you were approaching a river, you just crank them up, and her draft reduced to just 6 feet.
6 feet is nothing. You could sail that up the Thames, almost to the source.
You could sail it into places no frigate or sloop of war would dare to go. And this is why, despite the tinderbox insults, she was commissioned for New South Wales.
Okay.
The British government, specifically people like Philip Gidley King, who was in London at the time and about to become governor of NSW, saw the potential.
Because they needed a scout?
They needed a spy, effectively. You have to remember the context. It's roughly 1800. The Napoleonic Wars are the backdrop to everything. Britain is terrified that the French,
right,
specifically the expedition under Nicolas Baudin, are going to claim the south coast of Australia.
The unknown southern land.
Ah.
Terra Australis Incognita.
Right. Britain held the east coast, New South Wales, but the south was a complete mystery. They needed a vessel that could get in close, map the rivers, check the inlets for French flags, and claim the territory. A deep draft frigate couldn't do that.
But the Lady Nelson could.
The Lady Nelson could.
So King inspects her at Deptford. He likes the keels, but he doesn't like the sails.
No. As I said, she was designed as a cutter. A cutter typically has 1 mast and a massive fore and aft mainsail. It's a very efficient rig for speed and sailing upwind, but it is heavy. That mainsail is an absolute beast to handle.
If that boom swings across in a storm, it'll take your head off.
Or capsize the boat. King looked at this and said, if we're sending this thing to the other side of the world, we can't rely on a cutter rig. It's just too dangerous for a small crew.
So what did he suggest?
He suggested converting her to a brig.
Which means?
2 masts, square sails. It breaks the sail area up into smaller, more manageable chunks. It's much easier for a small crew to handle square sails in a gale than 1 giant mainsail.
So it's less efficient upwind, maybe?
A bit, yes. But it's safer. It's the difference between a high-performance sports car and a rugged 4x4. One is fast, the other gets you there.
So they modify her, they provision her, and they find a commander. Lieutenant James Grant. What do we know about him?
James Grant is a fascinating character. He wasn't just a commander, he was a believer. He was a personal friend of Captain Schenck, the keel designer. He was an evangelist for this sliding keel technology.
Which is lucky.
It's very lucky because nobody else wanted to touch it.
I read that the crew situation was an absolute disaster before they even left the dock.
It was a mutiny of confidence. Veteran sailors would walk past the dock at Deptford, look at this tiny toy boat, look at the keel design, and just say, not a chance.
Just walked away.
Grant had men deserting constantly. The carpenter, the guy whose entire job is to keep the ship floating, took 1 look at her and deserted.
That's a bad sign. When the guy who fixes the leaks leaves, you know you're in trouble.
Exactly. Another guy got sick and had to be put ashore. By the time they finally left Portsmouth on March 18, 1800, Grant was running on a skeleton crew of about roughly 15 to 17 men, some of whom were decidedly second-rate.
And the ship itself was overloaded, right?
Yeah. Oh, dangerously so. They had to pack provisions for a voyage to Australia, 9 months of food, water for 6 months. They crammed it all into this 52-foot hull.
So what did that do to the waterline?
The result was that the freeboard, the distance from the waterline to the deck, was only 2 feet 9 inches.
52 feet 9 inches. I'm trying to visualize that. That's
Yeah.
that's not even knee height for a lot of people.
Less than waist height.
So if you are standing on the deck of the Lady Nelson in the middle of the ocean, the water is right there.
If the ship rolls even a few degrees, the deck is awash. You are wet constantly. The psychological pressure of being that close to the ocean day and night for months on end must have been immense. It's not just uncomfortable, it feels suicidal.
And they start off in a convoy, right? For safety in numbers.
That was the plan. She was supposed to sail with some big East Indiamen and the HMS Porpoise. But the Lady Nelson, with her bluff bow and her heavy load, was slow, painfully slow. She couldn't keep up.
I have this image of the little Lady Nelson paddling furiously while the big ships just cruise away over the horizon.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. The Brunswick, one of the big ships, actually threw them a tow line. You know, come on, little guy, we'll pull you.
That's a bit embarrassing.
It is, but the sea was rough. And Grant, to his credit, realized that the strain of being towed by a massive ship through heavy waves was going to rip the Lady Nelson apart. The bollards would rip out or the bow would collapse.
So he has a choice: be towed and break, or get left behind.
And he chooses to be left behind. He casts off the tow. He waves goodbye to the convoy. And effectively, he decides to sail this experimental, overloaded tinderbox to Australia alone.
Wow. That is a burn the boats moment. Or I guess untowed the boat moment. But his troubles were just starting. They get to the Cape Verde Islands and the secret weapon starts to fail.
They arrive at St. Jago, modern-day Praia, and it's bad news. They discover that the after keel, the back one, has snapped off. It's just gone.
So much for the indestructible sliding keel.
But it gets so much worse. The ship is leaking badly. And when they start investigating the leak, they find something that, frankly, should have sent the shipbuilders to prison.
What did they find?
You know how you seal a wooden ship with oakum? It's tarred hemp fiber hammered into the seams between the planks. It's tough, it's waterproof, it expands when it gets wet.
Right. Standard practice for centuries.
The builders at Deptford, presumably to save money or time, hadn't used oakum on the keel walls.
Oh, no.
They had used putty.
Putty, like glazier's putty.
Basically window sealant. It was brittle, it was washing away in the seawater, and the water was pouring in.
That is criminal negligence.
It was an absolute scandal. Grant was furious. Here he is defending this ship to his crew, telling them it's safe, and he finds out the builders literally glued it together.
So what does this do to morale?
It craters. His second mate, a man named Mr. Bailey, started sowing mutiny. He was telling the crew, "We are going to die. The captain is mad. The ship is a death trap."
Which, to be fair to the second mate, looked pretty accurate that moment.
It did. It really did. But Grant had to crush that dissent. He put the second mate ashore at the Cape Verde Islands and just left him there.
Wow.
If you don't like the ship, you can stay here.
Brutal, but effective.
Yeah.
So they fix the leaks, presumably with actual oakum this time, and they limp to the Cape of Good Hope. They arrive in July 1800. And this is where the mission changes completely.
Completely. Up until this point, the mission was simply get to Sydney. But at the Cape, Grant receives a packet of dispatches from the Duke of Portland. And these orders are, well, they're terrifying.
Wow.
The standard route to Sydney was to sail south of Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania. You go deep into the Southern Ocean, into the Roaring Forties, you circle around the bottom of Tasmania, and you come up the coast. It's long, it's cold, and it's rough. But it's known.
Right. It's the safe bet.
The new order said, don't go around, go through.
Through the best strait.
Exactly. Now, we know today that there is a strait between Victoria and Tasmania. But in 1800, that was still a hypothesis. Bass and Flinders had explored it in a whaleboat from the Sydney side, but no ship had ever sailed through it from the west.
So Grant is being asked to take his experimental, leaky, tiny brig and sail it blind into a piece of water that might not even be a strait.
It might be a bay, it might be a dead end.
But cul-de-sac.
Exactly. And if it was a dead end, he would be sailing onto what's called a lee shore. The prevailing wind blows from the west there. It pushes you onto the land. If there is no gap, you get smashed against the cliffs. You can't turn a square rigger around easily in those conditions. It was a massive navigational gamble.
But he does it. October 7th, 1800. He leaves the Cape.
He does. He heads into the Roaring Forties. And on December 3rd, 1800, he spots land. He has made landfall right on the border of modern South Australia and Victoria.
And this is where Grant starts his second career as a, let's say, a professional flatterer.
He really does. He starts naming everything he sees after his bosses and his friends. It's quite funny.
What are some examples?
He sees two mountains. They're extinct volcanoes. He names the first one Mount Schenck after the keel designer. Look, John, your ship made it.
Smart move.
Very smart. He names the other one Mount Gambier after Admiral James Gambier. He names a Cape Banks after Sir Joseph Banks. He names Portland Bay after the Duke of Portland, who sent the orders. He is literally writing a thank you note across the coastline.
But the crucial thing is, he finds the gap. He sails through.
He does. He becomes the first ship to sail through Bass Strait from west to east. He proves definitively that Tasmania is an island. He cuts days, maybe weeks, off the voyage to Sydney. And on December 16th, 1800, the Lady Nelson sails into Port Jackson.
That must have been a hell of an entrance. The tinderbox, the ship everyone mocked, sailing in with the news that the passage is open.
Grant was incredibly proud. He reported to Governor King that despite her size, she rode the heavy swells better than the big frigates. He said she was like a cork. She didn't fight the waves, she just bobbed over them.
So, mission accomplished, time for a long rest.
Absolutely not. In the colony of New South Wales, a ship that works is a ship that works. There's no downtime.
Right.
Governor King is desperate. He still needs to survey the South Coast properly because Grant, he sailed past a lot of it pretty quickly.
Including a very, very large bay that he missed.
Yes, he missed the entrance to Port Phillip. We'll get to that. But before we do, in 1801, Grant is sent back into Bass Strait to Western Port. And this leads to a really interesting footnote in history involving Churchill Island.
I love this detail. It's essentially the first farm in Victoria.
It is. Inside Western Port Bay, there is a small island. Grant decides to set up a garden. It's an experiment.
What's the point of that?
It was standard operating procedure for explorers back then. You plant crops to see what the soil will support and also to leave a food source for future castaways or settlers. So he clears the land, he plants wheat, corn, peas, rice, coffee, potatoes, a whole produce aisle.
And they went further than just planting, right?
They did. They built a blockhouse, a small log cabin, about 24 feet by 12 feet.
So, years before Batman or Faulkner founded Melbourne, the Lady Nelson crew built a cabin and a farm.
Correct. And the soil was incredible. When the Lady Nelson returned later, under a new commander, John Murray, they found the wheat was 6 feet high. The onions were huge.
Amazing.
They actually harvested the wheat to feed some swans they had captured.
Feeding premium, organically grown wheat to swans? That's a very Australian thing to do.
It is. But Grant's time was coming to an end. He was a surveyman, but he was tired of the colony. He resigned and went back to England, and command passed to his first mate, John Murray.
Now, Murray's a bit controversial, right?
He is. There's some evidence he might have faked some of his service records to get his rank. He wasn't the gentleman officer type like Grant was, but he was a very competent seaman, and he is the one who gets the glory of the big discovery.
Port Phillip Bay.
January 1802. Murray is back in the area, specifically told to check out any inlets Grant might have missed. He sees a gap in the coast that Grant had noted but hadn't entered.
And the entrance is terrifying.
It's called the Rip for a reason. The tidal water rushes out through this narrow gap, meeting the ocean swell. It creates a cauldron of breaking waves. It's one of the most dangerous harbor entrances in the world.
And he has to take the little Lady Nelson through that.
Well, he sends the launch boat in first. He was a smart man.
Good idea.
They row through the chaos and report a massive, calm harbor inside. So on February 14th, 1802, Valentine's Day, of all days, the Lady Nelson surfs through the Rip and enters Port Phillip.
The site of modern-day Melbourne.
Exactly. Murray was absolutely stunned. He described it in his log as most noble sheet of smooth water. He realized immediately that this was a far better harbor than Western Port. He sailed around, named Arthur's Seat because it looked like the hill in Edinburgh, and took formal possession of the land for King George III.
It's amazing to think of the Lady Nelson, this tiny 60-ton brig sailing around Port Phillip Bay. No skyscrapers, no container ships.
Nothing.
Just pristine coastline and indigenous fires on the hills.
And because of those sliding keels, she could go right up to the beaches. She could explore the shallows where a normal ship would be miles offshore. That was her superpower.
But the keels weren't perfect. They were her superpower, but also her Achilles heel. And this brings us to the next big name, Matthew Flinders.
The giant of Australian navigation.
Flinders arrives in the HMS Investigator to circumnavigate the continent. And he asks specifically for the Lady Nelson.
He does. He sees the value of the shallow draft. His plan is brilliant, really. I'll take the big investigator in the deep water, and the Lady Nelson can act as my tender, my scout dog, sniffing out the rivers and shallow bays.
It sounds like a perfect team,
Yeah.
but it went wrong. Horribly wrong on the Great Barrier Reef.
It went horribly wrong, and this is where we have to talk about material science. The sliding keels were made of timber, oak planks. They were strong, but they were wood.
And the Great Barrier Reef is made of.
Razor-sharp coral. When you sail in the reef, hitting things is almost inevitable for early explorers. It's a maze. When the Lady Nelson hit a sandbar, she was fine. Retract the keels, float off, no problem.
But when she hit coral,
The keels would catch, they would splinter, shear off, or get jammed in the case. She lost her main keel completely. She damaged her after keel. She lost her anchors because the coral cut the rope cables.
so she goes from being a scout dog to a liability.
A total liability. Flinders was a perfectionist on a mission. He couldn't afford to be babysitting a crippled brig. So in October 1802, he makes the call, "You're done, go back to Sydney."
That must have been a humiliating voyage home. Limping back, leaving the main expedition.
It was incredibly dangerous. She had no proper anchors left. The crew had to lash heavy cannons, the ship's guns together, to create a makeshift weight. Every night, they would heave these guns over the side just to stop the ship drifting onto the rocks.
That is desperate. Throw the guns over so we can sleep.
But she made it back. She always made it back. And this resilience is what defined her next chapter, the settlement era.
We move from exploration to logistics. And this is where the tinderbox becomes the taxi.
The intercolonial taxi, that's a great way to put it. In 1803, Governor King is still panicking about the French. Baudain's expedition is sniffing around Tasmania.
So he needs to put boots on the ground.
Immediately. He sends the Lady Nelson and a whaler called the Albion to establish the first settlement at Risdon Cove on the Derwent River.
This is a tough voyage, right? The Roaring Forties aren't kind to small ships.
The logbooks from this period are just a catalog of misery. Gales, sprung mast, lost boat, deck constantly underwater. But she gets them there. She lands Lieutenant Bowen and the first party of settlers and convicts.
But Risdon Cove was a bust, wasn't it?
A terrible sight. It was on the wrong side of the river. The water supply was poor. In 1804, Lieutenant Governor David Collins arrives. He's just abandoned a failed settlement at Port Phillip and decides to move everyone to the Derwent.
And he takes one look at Risdon
And says, nope, we're moving.
to Sullivan's Cove.
Which becomes Hobart. And who moves the camp? The Lady Nelson. She ferries the tents, the convicts, the soldiers, the supplies across the river. Later that year, she heads north to the Tamar River to help Colonel Patterson found Port Dalrymple, which is the modern Launceston area.
It's incredible. She basically founded the three major colonial cities, Melbourne by discovery, Hobart by transfer, and helped with Launceston.
Oh, and Newcastle. We can't forget Newcastle.
Yes, Newcastle, the Hunter River. She surveyed that in 1801 with Colonel Patterson, confirmed the massive coal deposits, and brought the first commercial cargo of coal back to Sydney. She was the colony's first collier.
I want to focus on one specific mission that I think really captures the human side of this ship, the Norfolk Island evacuation.
Ah, yes. This is the period from about 1807 to 1813. The British government decides to shut down the penal colony on Norfolk Island. It's too expensive, too isolated. They order everyone moved to Tasmania.
So you have families who have lived on this subtropical island for years, maybe decades, and suddenly they're told, pack up, we're moving you to a cold wilderness. And the Lady Nelson is the moving van. Now remember the size of the ship, 52 feet long, 17 feet wide.
And 60 tons.
They were cramming up to 50 passengers at a time into the hold.
50 people.
Plus the crew, plus their belongings, plus supplies for the voyage.
I can't even imagine the smell.
The smell, the heat, the seasickness. You were in the hold of a tossing brig in the Southern Ocean for weeks. No plumbing, minimal ventilation. It would have been hell on earth.
It really humanizes the story. We look at maps and see lines drawn from A to B, but the line represents hundreds of people shivering in the dark, vomiting, praying for the voyage to end.
And the Lady Nelson did trip after trip. She was relentless. She settled these people in places like New Norfolk and Longford and Tasmania. She essentially populated the island.
During this time, she gets a new, very powerful fan, Governor Lachlan Macquarie.
The father of Australia, as some call him. Macquarie absolutely loved this ship. He arrived in 1810. In 1811, he decided to do a grand tour of Tasmania, and he chose the Lady Nelson as his personal yacht.
Why her? He could have taken a bigger, more comfortable ship.
He wrote in his journal that she was the best and safest boat he had ever sailed. I think it goes back to what Grant said about her being a cork. A big ship smashes through waves, it shudders, it jars, it's violent. The Lady Nelson was so buoyant, she just lifted over them. For a passenger, that motion is much gentler than the violent crashing of a heavy frigate.
But even the governor's favorite gets into trouble. There's a story about Macquarie basically saving the ship from the scrap heap.
There is. It's 1821. She is sent to Port Macquarie, another place she helped establish. The bar at Port Macquarie is notorious. Even today, with modern motors, it's dangerous.
And she gets caught.
She strikes rocks inside the bar. She is holed. She fills with water and sinks onto the sand.
Wrecked.
Completely wrecked. Usually in 1821, that's the end. You strip the valuable copper sheathing, you brain the wood for the iron nails and fittings, and you walk away.
But not this time.
Not this time. By pure chance, Macquarie is on his farewell tour of the colony. He comes up the coast, sees his beloved little ship sitting on the beach, looking sad and broken.
It's the Herbie the Love Bug moment.
It really is. He personally orders her to be raised. He authorizes the budget to fix her. He says, save that ship. If it wasn't for his sentimental attachment, her story would have ended there in 1821.
But she is saved. She is patched up. And she enters her final and her darkest chapter.
Yes. Macquarie leaves. The new administration looks at the map and looks north. It's 1824. The British want to establish a fort in the far north of Australia, on Melville Island, near modern Darwin. They call it Fort Dundas.
We are entering a totally different world now. We've gone from the cold, windy, roaring 40s of Tasmania to the tropical heat of the top end. Crocodiles, monsoons, isolation.
And scurvy and hunger. The settlement at Fort Dundas was a complete disaster. They couldn't grow food. The men were dying. The Lady Nelson was stationed there as a guard ship and supply vessel.
So she's old now. She's 24 years old. That's ancient for a timber ship in the tropics, with the shipworms and the rot.
She's rot-prone. She's tired. And the crew at the settlement is desperate. In early 1825, the commander of the fort receives orders to send the Lady Nelson north to the islands of what is now Indonesia, Timor, and the surrounding archipelago.
The mission. Get food. At any cost.
Buy buffalo, buy pigs, anything. Just save the settlement. But there was a warning attached to the orders, a very specific intelligence briefing.
Stay away from the island Baba.
Or Bobber. The warning stated that the inhabitants were daring and cruel and associated with piracy. The orders were explicit, do not go there.
Right.
But in February 1825, that is exactly where the Lady Nelson was found. We don't know why. Maybe a storm blew them off course. Maybe they couldn't find food anywhere else and got desperate. Maybe they just got careless after so many years.
What happens next is just a horror movie.
We have to piece it together from later reports. But the Lady Nelson anchored off the coast of Babar to trade. At first, it seemed peaceful. Canoes came out, people came aboard to barter, but it was a trap.
The swear.
While the crew was distracted, or perhaps just overwhelmed by sheer numbers, the locals attacked. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Every single man on board the Lady Nelson was killed.
Every man.
All of them. The ship was then systematically stripped. They took the guns, the iron, the sails, the rigging, anything of value. And then the Lady Nelson, the ship that discovered Port Phillip, the ship that carried the first settlers to Hobart, was set on fire.
Burned to the waterline?
And sunk. Just erased from the map.
How do we even know this?
Yeah.
If everyone died who told the story.
That is the most chilling part of this whole tale. Months later, another ship, a schooner called the Steadcombe, was sent to look for her. Where's the Lady Nelson? She's overdue. They went to the same islands looking for answers. And they fell into the same trap. The Steadcombe was captured, the crew was beheaded, but 2 boys were spared. One of them was named Joseph Forbes. He was just a kid.
They kept him.
They kept him as a slave. He lived on those islands for 14 years.
14 years.
He wasn't rescued until 1839. When he finally got back to civilization, a grown man, he was the one who told the story. He had seen the hull of the Lady Nelson rotting on the beach with the name still painted on the stern. He saw the local villagers using the ship's cannons as their own. He was the witness to the ghost.
That is such a heavy, brutal ending. You have this image of the Lady Nelson as this plucky, cheerful little explorer planting wheat and feeding swans. And she ends up as a burnt hulk in a pirate cove.
It highlights the reality of the era. We sanitize history, we look at the neat charts and the names of the cities. But the frontier was violent, it was unpredictable, and it was unforgiving. The Lady Nelson lived on that knife edge for 25 years. Eventually, her luck ran out.
So the original wooden iron is gone, but she still exists in a way.
She does. If you go to Hobart today, look out at the Derwent River. You might see a small two-masted brig sailing there.
The replica.
Yes. Built for the Australian bicentenary in 1988. It was a massive community project in Tasmania. They built her out of Tasmanian blue gum and celery top pine. A man named Ray Kemp was the master builder.
Is it an exact copy?
Visually, yes. It has the sliding keels, though I believe they are fixed now for safety reasons. It has the same brig rig, but thankfully it has diesel engines, steel water tanks, and modern navigation gear.
And presumably they used oakum, not putty, in the construction.
One would hope. She's a sail training vessel now. You can go on board, you can stand on that deck and feel just how small it is. There is also a full-size non-sailing replica in Mount Gambier, sitting in a park to honor Grant's naming of the mountain.
It is fitting that she is remembered in both places, the mountain she named and the city she helped build.
When you look at her resume, it's just untouched. No other single ship in the early Australian colony did as much work. First through Bass Strait, found Port Phillip, founded Hobart, Launceston, Newcastle, even Brisbane indirectly through the Flinders Survey and the northern settlements. She was the absolute linchpin.
And she did it all while being mocked and written off as a tinderbox.
It's the ultimate vindication for an ugly duckling.
So let's wrap this up. What is the takeaway here? Why should we care about a 60-ton brig from 1800?
For me, it's about the triumph of utility over grandeur. History so often focuses on the great men and the great ships, but the Lady Nelson wasn't great. She wasn't grand. She was useful. She was a tool. She was a specialized, experimental, slightly weird tool that happened to be exactly what was needed at that moment in time.
It's also a lesson in innovation, isn't it? The sliding keels, everyone like, that's stupid, that will sink. But without that stupid idea, the mapping and settlement of Australia would have taken decades longer.
Exactly. Innovation looks like madness until it works. Captain Shank was mad until he was a genius.
And my final thought is about that pirate warning. It's a reminder that you can survive the Southern Ocean, you can survive the Great Barrier Reef, you can even survive the putty in the hull. But one bad decision, one wrong turn into the wrong bay can end it all. It shows the incredible fragility of the whole enterprise.
Absolutely. The margin for error was zero.
Well, next time you are in Hobart, go find the Lady Nelson. Stand on the deck, close your eyes, and imagine 50 people squeezed in there with you, smashing through a gale, smelling of unwashed bodies and salt beef. It will make your commute home feel a lot more luxurious.
It certainly will.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.